Parisians rioted in the streets when Alexandre Dumas, a mixed-race writer critics dismissed as a fraud who stole other people's work, refused to bring a character back to life. The man they tried to erase wrote the Three Musketeers, and 180 years later, his enemies are forgotten while his musketeers are immortal. The novel appeared in serialized form in the newspaper Le Siècle, and the city was gripped by musketeer mania. Shopkeepers abandoned their counters, the workers delayed their shifts, and cafes fell silent as patrons devoured the latest chapter of the Three Musketeers. Readers couldn't get enough of the swashbuckling adventure, the clashing swords, the brotherhood forged in combat. Dumas had tapped into something primal, the fantasy of loyalty, honor, and friendship tested by danger. But even as his fame soared, the attacks intensified. Critics accused him of plagiarism and of running a fiction factory where ghostwriters did the real work while he simply signed his name. And beneath the literary sniping ran a darker, more vicious current. Whispers about whether a man with African blood could truly be considered a great French writer. Alexandre Dumas was a force of nature, tall, flamboyant, with a booming laugh and an appetite for life that scandalized and delighted Paris in equal measure. He threw lavish parties at his chateau, entertained mistresses, pacing his study, gesturing wildly, acting pacing his study, gesturing wildly, acting out sword fights and love scenes with theatrical flourish. His critics called him undisciplined, a showman rather than a true artist. But his readers didn't care about literary respectability. They wanted adventure, passion, heroes they could believe in, and Dumas delivered. The accusations of plagiarism centered on Auguste Maquet, a collaborator who researched historical details and helped structure the plots. Dumas never hid the collaboration, but his enemies seized on it, claiming Maquet was the real author and Dumas merely signed his name. The truth was more complex. Maquet provided the scaffolding, but Dumas supplied the magic, the crackling dialogue, the vivid characters, the sheer joy of the storytelling. Without Dumas, de Maquet's historical research would have remained dry and lifeless. Without Maquet, Dumas might have wandered into narrative chaos. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. But Dumas' detractors wanted to diminish him, and the collaboration gave them ammunition. Yet none of the controversy slowed the phenomenon of the Three Musketeers. Each new installment sent readers into raptures. The novel had everything: sword fights, political intrigue, a beautiful queen, a villainous cardinal, a femme fatale with ice in her veins, and at the center of it all, four friends bound by a motto that would echo across centuries: all for one, one for all. Dumas understood that readers didn't want moral complexity or psychological realism. They wanted to escape into a world where courage mattered, where friendship was sacred, where a young man with nothing but ambition and a sword could change his destiny. The literary establishment sneered, but the people had spoken. The Three Musketeers wasn't just a novel, it was a cultural event. D'Artagnan arrived in Paris with three things: an old yellow horse that made people laugh, a letter of introduction to the captain of the Musketeers, and an ego far larger than his purse. Within hours, he had managed to insult three of the king's finest warriors and challenge each of them to a duel. First, he bumped into Athos and called him out. Then he offended Porthos by staring at his sword belt. Finally, he mocked Aramis's handkerchief. 3 duels in one afternoon, all scheduled for the same time at the same place. Any sensible young man would have fled the city. D'Artagnan sharpened his sword. When he arrived at the appointed spot behind the Carmelite monastery, he found his 3 opponents already waiting. Athos, elegant and melancholy, carried himself with the grace of fallen nobility. Porthos, vain and powerful, wore his strength like a costume. Aramis, the quietest of the 3, You had the eyes of a man with secrets. They were about to end this provincial upstart when the cardinal's guards appeared, looking for trouble. Dueling was illegal, and the cardinal's men intended to arrest them all. D'Artagnan didn't hesitate. He drew his sword and fought alongside the musketeers against the guards. In the space of a single fight, enemies became brothers. This is the genius of Dumas. He understood that the best friendships are forged in fire. That loyalty means more when it's tested. That brotherhood isn't about blood, but about who stands beside you when the swords come out. The four men became inseparable. Athos, the leader, noble and haunted by a tragic past. Porthos, the braggart with a heart of gold. Aramis, who claimed to want nothing more than to join the priesthood, but couldn't quite give up dueling and women. And D'Artagnan, the youngest, the hungriest, desperate to prove himself worthy of the company he now kept. Their bond was tested immediately. D'Artagnan fell in love with Constance Bonacieux, a seamstress to the Queen, who drew him into the dangerous world of court politics. The musketeers didn't question his passion or his recklessness. They simply asked, "What do you need?" It's a small moment in the novel, but it reveals everything about their friendship. No judgment, no hesitation, just loyalty. The plot of the Three Musketeers revolves around Queen Anne of Austria, who is having an affair with the Duke of Buckingham, the most powerful man in England. Cardinal Richelieu, the true power behind King Louis XIII's throne, despises the Queen and schemes to expose her infidelity. The Queen had given Buckingham a gift, 12 diamond studs that the King himself had presented to her. Richelieu convinces the King to throw a ball and insists the Queen wear the diamond studs. It's a trap. The Queen no longer has the studs, and when she appears without them, her affair will be exposed and her reputation destroyed. D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers take on an impossible mission. Travel to England, retrieve the diamond studs from Buckingham, and return to Paris before the ball. The journey is a gauntlet of ambushes, betrayals, and near-fatal encounters. Richelieu's agents attack them on the road. One by one, the musketeers fall away, wounded or trapped, until only D'Artagnan remains to complete the mission. Athos is injured in a tavern fight and stays behind to hold off their pursuers, buying time with his sword. Porthos is trapped in a duel he cannot escape. Aramis is seduced by a woman who turns out to be one of Richelieu's spies and barely escapes with his life. D'Artagnan rides alone through enemy territory, exhausted, terrified, but refusing to quit. He reaches Buckingham, retrieves the studs, and races back to Paris just in time. The Queen wears the diamonds to the ball, and Richelieu's trap collapses. It's a small victory, but it cements D'Artagnan's place among the musketeers. More importantly, it proves what Dumas believed about friendship, that the greatest gift you can give someone is trust. The musketeers trusted D'Artagnan to finish what they started, and he did. If you love stories about loyalty, courage, and the underdogs who changed history, subscribe so you never miss another tale like this one. But the novel's true masterpiece is Milady de Winter, one of the most complex and terrifying villains in literature. Beautiful, intelligent, ruthless, Milady is Richelieu's secret agent, a woman who uses seduction and her cunning with equal skill. D'Artagnan falls for her, only to discover her true nature. Athos reveals his own devastating connection to her. Years ago, Athos had been a young nobleman in love. He married a woman he thought was virtuous, only to discover she was a branded criminal. In his rage and heartbreak, he left her for gone. When that woman was Milady, she survived, and now she has returned, more dangerous than ever. What makes Milady so terrifying isn't just her ruthlessness, it's her intelligence. She doesn't rely on brute force. She studies her enemies, finds their weaknesses, and exploits them with surgical precision. She seduces a young English officer and convinces him to commit treason for her. She infiltrates a convent to get close to Constance. Every move is calculated, every word a weapon. Dumas gives her a complexity that most villains never achieve. She's not evil for the sake of being evil. She's a woman who learned early that the world gives women no power except their beauty and their cunning, and she decided to use those weapons without mercy or apology. Milady's vendetta drives the second half of the novel into darker territory. She seduces, manipulates, and destroys her way through the story, leaving devastation behind her. She ends the life of D'Artagnan's lover, her Constance, in one of the book's most heartbreaking moments. Constance passes away in D'Artagnan's arms, and for the first time in the novel, the young hero realizes that not every story has a happy ending. The Musketeers finally hunt her down, put her on trial, and justice is served. It's a grim conclusion for a character who transcends simple villainy. Milady is a woman surviving in a world that gave her no power except her beauty and her cunning, and she wielded those weapons without mercy. What makes the Three Musketeers endure isn't the historical intrigue or even the sword fights. It's the bond between the four friends. All for one, one for all isn't just a motto. It's a philosophy, a promise that no matter what happens, they'll face it together. In a world of betrayal and political machination, their friendship is the only thing that's pure. Dumas lavishes love on these characters, gives them wit and warmth and contradictions. They drink too much, fight too often, chase women with abandon. And yet, when the moment comes, they would sacrifice everything for each other without hesitation. That's the fantasy Dumas sold. And it's the reason readers keep returning to this story. There's a scene late in the novel where the four friends sit together in a tavern, drinking wine and reminiscing about their adventures. They don't talk about glory or victory. They talk about the moments they thought they'd lose each other, the close calls, and the times when everything hung by a thread. And then Athos raises his glass and says, "We're still here." It's a simple line, but it carries the weight of everything they've been through. They survived, together. The novel captures something essential about youth and ambition, the reckless courage of a young man who believes he can conquer the world, the intoxicating thrill of friendship, the discovery that honor matters more than safety. And D'Artagnan's journey from provincial nobody to musketeer is the journey every reader wants to take. Dumas makes us believe we could be heroes too. To understand why Dumas wrote with such passion about honor and loyalty, you need to know about his father. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas was born in 1762 in what is now Haiti, the son of a French nobleman and an enslaved black woman named Marie-Cécile Dumas. He rose to become one of the most remarkable generals in French history, a giant of a man who performed acts of heroism that seemed impossible. His soldiers called him the Black Devil and the Horatius Cockles of the Tyrol. In one famous incident, he held a bridge against an entire Austrian regiment, fighting alone until reinforcements arrived. By 1793, at age 31, he had risen to the rank of general, then one of the highest-ranking men of African descent in European military history. Napoleon Bonaparte served under General Dumas, but when the two men clashed, Napoleon had his revenge. After Dumas was imprisoned for 2 years in brutal conditions that destroyed his health, he returned to France expecting recognition. Instead, Napoleon quietly erased him from history. When General Dumas passed away in 1806, Napoleon didn't attend the funeral. He began the work of making sure this mixed-race hero would be forgotten. Alexandre Dumas, only 4 years old when his father left this world, spent his life rewriting that ending. Young Alexandre grew up hearing stories of his father's heroism, but he also grew up poor, watching his mother struggle to survive. The world told him his father's legacy didn't matter because of the color of his skin. So Alexandre decided to create his own heroes, ones the world couldn't ignore or erase. He moved to Paris at 20 with almost no money and a hunger to prove himself. The parallels to D'Artagnan are impossible to miss. Dumas turned his pain into stories that outlasted empires. What's a book, movie, or story that helped you feel seen when the world told you that you didn't belong? Share your answer in the comments below. The Three Musketeers is Alexandre Dumas, reclaiming his father's honor through fiction. And D'Artagnan's journey from nobody to hero mirrors Dumas's own rise from poverty to fame. The Musketeers' motto, "All for one, one for all," reflects the loyalty Dumas wished the world had shown his father. There's a scene where D'Artagnan, intoxicated and melancholy, confesses to Athos that he never knew his father. Athos replies, "Then we are your fathers now." It's one line, but it captures everything Dumas felt. The ache of absence, the hope of found family, so the possibility that the family you choose can matter more than the family you lost. Paris in the 1840s was in the grip of feuilleton fever, serialized novels published in daily newspapers that turned reading into an addiction. The business model was brilliant. Newspapers needed content to drive sales, and readers would buy a paper every single day if it meant getting the next chapter of a story that had them hooked. Alexandre Dumas was the undisputed master of the cliffhanger. See, some chapters of The Three Musketeers end mid-sentence, literally cutting off the action at the most exciting moment. Readers would finish a chapter and immediately want to throw the newspaper across the room in frustration. But the next morning, they'd be first in line to buy the next installment. When Dumas ended a character's story, riots broke out. Readers stormed the Le Siècle offices, demanding the character be brought back. Dumas appeared on his balcony and shouted, "I am not God. I cannot resurrect the gone." The crowd booed. He bowed. And the next day, sales doubled. Dumas understood something fundamental about storytelling. People don't just want to consume a story. They want to feel like they're part of it, like it matters to them personally. The riots weren't just about a fictional character. They were about readers who had invested their emotions, their time, their hope in these people, and they weren't ready to let go. The accusations that Dumas ran a fiction factory never stopped. Critics pointed to Auguste Maquet and other collaborators, insisting Dumas was a fraud. But Dumas defended himself with characteristic flair. His collaborators had tried to publish novels under their own names, and none had succeeded. Without his genius for dialogue, character, and pacing, their work was lifeless. After all, Shakespeare worked with a theatre company. Michelangelo had assistants in his workshop. Why should a novelist be any different? The criticism stung, but it also revealed something about the literary establishment. They couldn't accept that a mixed-race writer, a man they considered an outsider, could be this successful, this beloved. So they looked for reasons to diminish him. The Three Musketeers is historical fiction, but Dumas played fast and loose with the facts. The real D'Artagnan lived decades after the events Dumas describes. The real Cardinal Richelieu was a brilliant statesman, not the scheming villain of the novel. Dumas didn't care about accuracy. He cared about emotional truth, about creating characters and stories that felt real, even if the details were invented. He once joked that he bent history to serve his stories, creating beautiful children from the past. History gave him the raw materials. His imagination gave them life. By the time Alexandre Dumas reached his 60s, in his generosity and refusal to manage his finances, finally caught up with him. He had made a fortune from his writing, enough to build a chateau and live like royalty. But he gave money to friends who never paid him back, supported struggling artists, threw parties that cost more than most people earned in a year. He believed in living fully. in experiencing everything life had to offer. The cost of that philosophy was bankruptcy. The chateau was sold. Creditors came calling. In 1870, Dumas fled to Belgium to escape his debts. He passed away there in December at the age of 68, far from Paris, far from the glory he had once known. But the Three Musketeers didn't fade with him. The novel never went out of print. It was adapted into plays, films, television series, musicals, comic books, and video games. The Musketeers became immortal, more famous than any real historical figure from 17th century France. Every generation rediscovers the Three Musketeers and falls in love with it all over again. Why? Because the fantasy it offers, that friendship can be pure, that loyalty can be absolute, that courage matters, never gets old. We need that fantasy now as much as readers needed it in 1844. For over a century after he left this world, Alexandre Dumas' racial heritage was downplayed or erased. France celebrated him as a great writer, but preferred not to talk about his African ancestry. So textbooks mentioned Dumas, but not his father. Museums displayed his manuscripts, but cropped his photos. It was easier to celebrate the work and erase the man. They wanted his genius, but they didn't want to acknowledge where it came from, or what he had overcome to achieve it. In 2002, France finally gave Dumas the honor he deserved. His remains were moved to the Pantheon in Paris, the resting place of France's greatest heroes. So President Jacques Chirac gave a speech acknowledging the injustice of Dumas' treatment. When Dumas' coffin entered the Pantheon, carried by Republican guards dressed as musketeers, Chirac said something that would have made Dumas laugh and cry at the same time. "With you, we were all musketeers. Not some of us, all of us. The outsider, the mixed-race son of a forgotten general, the man who'd been called a fraud and a hack. He had given France a gift so powerful that a president stood in front of the nation and admitted, 'You made us believe we could be heroes.'" Dumas' body was draped in blue velvet, embroidered with the motto he made famous, "All for one, one for all." The ceremony was a reckoning and a celebration. France was finally claiming all of Alexandre Dumas, not just his talent but his identity, not just his novels but his defiance. He had lived as an outsider and triumphed anyway. He had faced prejudice, a bankruptcy, and critical dismissal, and he had kept writing. He had turned his father's lost glory into stories that would outlive empires. The Three Musketeers is many things: a swashbuckling adventure, a historical epic, a meditation on friendship and honor. But more than anything, it's a love letter to the idea that we can be heroes, that our lives can matter, that loyalty and courage still exist somewhere, even if only on the page. Dumas looked at a world that told him he didn't belong, and wrote a story about belonging so powerful that it made everyone, rich and poor, French and foreign, black and white, believe they could be musketeers too. He proved that the stories we tell matter, that representation matters, that seeing yourself reflected in heroes matters. Every writer who's ever been told they don't belong, every reader who's ever felt like an outsider, every person who's ever been underestimated because of who they are, Dumas wrote for all of them. He wrote to prove that talent transcends prejudice, that great art comes from the margins, that the outsiders often see the truth more clearly than those at the center. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the outsiders, the underestimated, and the ones they tried to erase can still change the world. 180 years after D'Artagnan rode into Paris with nothing but a sword and a dream, Alexandre Dumas lies among France's greatest, his body draped in blue velvet, embroidered with 4 words that will outlive us all. All for one. One for all.